Some killers never get headlines, not because their crimes were small, but because their timing was perfect. No witnesses, no pattern the police could connect, and no body ever recovered in a way that screamed for attention. What they left behind was quieter than a scream. It was a locked room, a name on a work order, a face you wouldn't remember if you passed them twice. This is the story of one of those men. It begins in Chicago, in a low-income housing complex on 77th Street, where a winter pipe burst during renovations led workers to tear open a wall between floors 3 and 4. What they found wasn't insulation. It was a sealed studio apartment. No number, no mailbox, no window. Just a locked door that opened only from the outside, foam-lined walls, a bed frame, and a stained carpet with a circular pattern worn into the floor, as if something had been dragged repeatedly from the center outward. In the closet were 15 coat hangers, rusted but clean. Beneath a floorboard, workers found a warped plastic ID badge melted slightly by time and pressure. The name Irene Gillespie. She'd gone missing in 1991 after a night shift at a nearby diner. She was never found. Her case had been closed. But now her ID was sitting in a room that, according to every blueprint on file with the city, had never existed. The building manager had no record of Unit 4B. It wasn't on rental ledgers. It had no lease. But within 24 hours, 4 more melted ID cards were found hidden behind panels and beneath tiles. All women who'd gone missing between 1983 and 1996. None had been tenants, but each had filed a service request with building maintenance within 48 hours of disappearing. Their names were buried inside old carbon-copied work orders stacked in dusty boxes in the basement. Requests for leaking pipes, broken locks, flickering lights. Every ticket had been marked completed. Everyone had the same initials beside it. K.R. Kenneth Rowe, the building's janitor from 1983 to 1997, had retired after a supposed injury and died quietly in a nursing home in 2008. No family, no criminal history, no suspicion. But over his 14 years on the job, he had worked in 8 buildings owned by the same management company, and 7 of them had at least one unsolved disappearance attached to their address. When investigators reopened the old files, they discovered that Kenneth had repeatedly volunteered for night duty. He preferred units without cameras. Maintenance requests were always closed without follow-up. In some cases, he requested the keys himself, noting that the lock wasn't catching or needed to be checked. No one questioned it. He wore a uniform. He showed up early. He smiled. He died before anyone ever thought to ask what he might have been hiding. But the evidence began to multiply. A sister property on the south side was scheduled for demolition. Investigators requested one last walkthrough. Behind a boarded utility room on the ground floor, they found a secondary wall. It had been sealed over with drywall painted to match the hallway. When it was torn open, they discovered another room. Same foam insulation, same hanger bar, same silence. No light, no windows. Just old mattress coils and tape fragments still clinging to the walls. There was no blood, no fingerprints. But the smell beneath the paint was enough for cadaver dogs to hit. And in the corner, buried under a loose panel, was a lipstick cap with human skin cells preserved in a gluey residue that matched a woman reported missing in 1987. Her name had never even made the news. The problem wasn't just the age of the cases, it was the way Rowe had hidden the rooms themselves. Each was built between spaces, between apartments, behind closets, under false floor joists. He used forgotten maintenance rooms, old ventilation shafts, service panels that no one opened anymore. And every one of them was designed not for violence, but for containment. Silence. The walls weren't just covered in foam, they were lined with copper mesh, the kind used in audio recording studios to block signal interference. It suggested a level of planning no one expected from a janitor. And yet there were no plans, no purchases linked to his name, no receipts. He never drove. He never called out sick. He never raised his voice. He simply moved between buildings, and people vanished. Rowe's employment records showed he often requested transfers, always to buildings with units under renovation, always places with basement access, and always someone would go missing within 6 months of his arrival. Some victims were never even reported: immigrant women, students renting without paperwork, people working night shifts who had no one looking for them. The numbers will never be known, but investigators now believe there may be as many as 16 unidentified victims connected to his locations. The rooms didn't just hold them, they silenced them. And when Rowe died, they remained sealed, forgotten, perfectly preserved in the dead space between one tenant's closet and another's living room. In 2021, after the first discovery, renovation crews were instructed to examine all known Rowe-era buildings owned by the same company. 3 more sealed rooms were uncovered. In one, they found wire remnants and an old food tray. In another, a Bible open to Psalms and a shoelace tied into a tourniquet. But the worst was in a North Lawndale property, a small concrete space just 6 feet by 8, with walls painted over 3 times. The layers were chipped back to reveal faint symbols scratched into the paint, tally marks. One wall had 32 of them, another had none. The carpet beneath had been replaced, but the stain remained, a circular pattern, identical to the original room. Investigators never released the photo. The property was condemned and sold within a year. New management stripped the address from public listings. But the workers remember what they saw, and somewhere in those walls, no matter how many times they paint over it, is the imprint of hands pressed hard against foam that never pushed back. Kenneth Rowe's name was never connected publicly to any crime, but among the detectives who followed the trail, there is no doubt, they call it the 4B pattern, not for evidence, for architecture. Because Rowe didn't improvise, he built, slowly, repeatedly, with precision, and the only reason anyone found it was because a pipe burst in the wrong place at the wrong time. The question now is how many more of those rooms are still out there, waiting, silent, unaccounted for? Because some men don't run, they just hide their work so well it takes decades for someone to find the door. But if Kenneth Rowe left behind rooms built from silence, the next name on the list left behind something stranger: a barn in rural Iowa, where the dead were never hidden, only posed, hung upright, with fishing line, with wire, with wooden joints, like dolls in a show only one man ever watched. The barn sat alone in the middle of 30 acres in Calhoun County, Iowa, surrounded by rust-colored corn stubble and wind that never stopped. The house next to it had been empty since 2002, but no one thought much of it. Just another patch of farmland, abandoned after the owner died at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee still warm. His name was Delmer Voss. He had no wife, no children. The only living relative on record was a brother who died 11 years earlier. When Voss's death was logged, no investigation followed. The coroner wrote down heart failure. The county sealed the property, and for 7 years, no one touched it. Not until 2009, when a clean energy company bought the acreage to install wind turbines. A team arrived in the spring to assess the ground, check the soil, and measure the height of the barn before it could be cleared. Inside, they found nothing useful. No tools, no vehicles, no livestock stalls, just pulleys, hung in even lines along the upper rafters, 5 to a beam. Grooves cut into the wood from years of friction. Fishing line clung to the corners, in long strands like webbing. One worker slipped through a weak floorboard in the loft and kicked open a hollow compartment. Inside was a carved wooden joint, human-sized, sanded smooth, bent at the elbow with 2 screws still in place. The pulleys above it weren't for lifting hay, they were for lifting something else. Local deputies returned to the property with bolt cutters and thermal cameras. The barn floor read warm in patches despite the cold air. Shallow trenches had been dug and packed with soil years ago, 8 in total. When they started digging, they didn't find bodies, just bones, pieces, fragments, femurs, ribs, vertebrae. No skulls, no hands, no feet. What they did find, fused into the ends of 2 femurs, were steel hooks, screwed in, like anchor points. Ligature markings on the joints suggested these limbs had been suspended repeatedly before burial. 2 of the bones had discoloration from what the lab identified as paraffin wax, something used in preservation. There was no clothing, no DNA, but they weren't alone. A crate was recovered from beneath a tarp containing 7 life-sized puppets, each built from wood and wire, each dressed in partial scraps of flannel, denim, or burlap. Their arms were jointed with rotating pins. Their heads were blank, featureless ovals. One had a word carved into its chest, B-I-N-D. Another had an arm broken at the joint and repaired with electrical tape. These weren't toys. They were prototypes. The farmhouse had no bed, no kitchen appliances, no photos on the walls. But in the basement, they found something else. A sunken room, 4 feet deep, lined with 3 concrete pillars mounted into the ground like anchors. Suspended above them was a network of pulleys mounted into the ceiling, with color-coded tape wrapped around lengths of fishing wire that extended downward and coiled loosely on the floor. The walls were bare concrete, but near the back wall, investigators discovered thin chalk outlines in faint white, full-body human silhouettes drawn and then erased. On one pillar, a torn piece of black and white fabric hung from a hook. When it was tested, trace DNA suggested it had belonged to a missing man named Gary Dean, a 23-year-old hitchhiker who disappeared in 1998 after stopping at a gas station 18 miles away. His van had been found abandoned. Inside was a receipt for rope and a sandwich that had gone moldy. No one had connected him to Voss. Until now. One more room sat at the back of the barn behind a false panel, no more than 10 feet across. A square platform sat bolted to the floor with a rusted turntable beneath it. Above, 4 eye hooks drilled into the crossbeam. Next to it, a stack of burned Polaroids, all overexposed, all damaged, except one. A figure hung in midair, limbs spread and lifted by black threads, head tilted, arms back. The photo was dated May 3, 1998. The same week, Gary Dean disappeared. His face was scratched out with a pin. Beneath the photo, the word "jointed" was carved into the floorboard with a penknife. No journal was ever recovered, no confession, no manifesto, just patterns, wood, wire, pulleys, bones, some partially buried, some shattered, some missing altogether. In all, 11 different DNA sources were recovered from the barn and soil. None had been reported as victims of Voss. Some matched transient populations, men and women who had stopped through Iowa and never been heard from again. The FBI quietly opened a file. But with Voss already dead and no one else to question, it went nowhere. One behavioral analyst wrote in her notes that this was not about power, sex, or sadism. This was choreography. Voss had turned the barn into a stage, built figures from wood, tested joints, then moved on to the real thing. Not just to kill, but to pose, to rehearse. One femur showed signs of repeated suspension, grooves from the same hook being tightened, adjusted, repositioned. Another bone had metal shavings embedded in the end. It had been altered to fit a different pulley system. Whoever these people were, they had been moved again and again, lifted, twisted, repositioned, until the final arrangement was complete. Then discarded, like props or mistakes. The puppets were never made public, nor was the tape labeled Set 7, found in the basement, half erased, containing nothing but creaking sounds and thuds for 23 minutes. What it captured has never been released. The farm was demolished in 2011. Developers never completed the project. The land was resold. But even now, locals won't hunt near that barn. Not because of ghosts, because of what they saw inside, because of the photos, because of the things nailed to the walls. One officer kept a piece of wire, says it still smells like cedar and rust even now. He keeps it in a locked drawer and doesn't touch it. Voss never hid what he did. He didn't bury it deep. He buried it wide, spread across ropes and lines and grooves in the beams that look ordinary until you see the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every line was used, every hook placed for a reason, and someone at some point watched. The next killer never used rope. He never needed pulleys. His method was smaller, quieter. He only needed a house, a basement, and one person to answer an ad that didn't exist. He only needed a house, a basement, and one person to answer an ad that didn't exist. The house was a plain brick duplex in Monroe County, Michigan, half a block off the state highway, with a patchy lawn and window blinds that never opened. It looked like every other rental unit on the street, quiet, inoffensive, a little neglected. But the left side of the building was something else entirely. No one ever lived there for more than 3 months. Every June, someone new arrived with a backpack and a bus ticket. Men in their 20s or 30s. People no one in the neighborhood knew. No furniture was moved in, no family visited, no license plates repeated. They came alone, stayed until August, then disappeared. The pattern stretched across 15 summers. The man who owned the house, Gerald Vance, was quiet, retired, friendly. He kept to himself, trimmed the hedges, brought in his neighbor's mail. No one ever questioned how often he had vacancies. No one saw flyers or rental signs. But every May the lights came on in the left unit, and every September they went off again. The mailbox stayed empty. The trash bins were spotless. Nothing ever overflowed. It wasn't until October 2005 that anyone filed a report. A postal worker noticed that the same address had received 3 different names of mail in one summer, all marked current resident, all forwarded from halfway houses or P.O. boxes. The mail stopped without warning in August. When officers arrived for a welfare check, they found the unit fully furnished. Bed, table, lamp, food in the cupboard. But no occupant. No suitcases. No clothing. No toothbrush in the bathroom. Everything was spotless. Even the trash bags were folded. But the basement door was locked with a sliding bolt that could only be opened from the inside. When it was forced open, officers found a dry, clean basement, concrete floors, whitewashed walls, and one small rust-colored ring around the drain. The stain had been scrubbed, but not completely. Beneath the drain cap, embedded in the trap, were bone fragments. Burned, porous, fractured in ways that suggested high compression, not from accident, but from something being broken intentionally. No fingerprints were found on any surfaces in the unit. The refrigerator contained one item, a single piece of masking tape stuck to the back wall. Written in black marker, Do not keep. The police contacted Gerald Vance. He had sold the property a few months earlier and relocated out of state. His new address led nowhere. A P.O. box registered in a name that didn't match any current license. The sale paperwork had been completed through a lawyer who claimed not to have met Vance in person. Investigators began reviewing tenant records, but there were none. No leases had ever been filed. The local water company, however, kept handwritten ledgers, old billing logs maintained before digital records. In those notes, water usage in the left unit followed the exact same pattern 15 years in a row. A spike in June, a drop in July, near zero use in August. The toilets were flushed, the showers were run, but only for 90 days. Then nothing. The cycle repeated precisely from 1990 to 2005. Further investigation led to the discovery of 3 sealed manila folders in the basement crawlspace behind a loose panel. Inside each were driver's licenses, ID cards, and booking paperwork, each for a different man, all from out of state, all with recent records of transitional housing or pretrial diversion programs. 2 of the men were confirmed deceased, their remains found in unrelated locations years earlier. But the third, Brandon Kessler, was still listed as missing, last seen entering a job center in Detroit in May of 2002. According to the folder, a rental agreement had been written out by hand. No address, no rent amount, just a date range. June 3rd to August 15th. Forensics recovered microscopic traces of accelerant from the corners of the drain ring. The assumption was fire, flash burns, but the rest of the basement was untouched. The air vents had been sealed, the windows were double-layered and painted over. The floor had been ground down in a tight circle, exactly 2 feet in diameter. The plastic scraper found nearby had no handle. Just one corner melted down as if by a torch. A neighbor later reported hearing odd humming sounds during the summer nights. Not voices, not movement, just a low mechanical whine, steady, always after dark. When asked why she didn't report it, she said she assumed someone was doing laundry. No additional victims were ever confirmed, but 13 missing persons between 1990 and 2005 matched the same description. Men between 25 and 40, all recently released from custody or transitioning out of treatment programs. All had no permanent address. All had attempted to rent housing through job centers or public postings. None had living family nearby. None had vehicles registered in Michigan. The cases were never linked, not until the mailbox names were logged by the postal worker, not until the drain was opened. And even then, the conclusion was incomplete. Vance had no prior criminal record, no social media, no photographs beyond an old DMV file. His last known bank activity was a withdrawal for $22.19 from a grocery store in Toledo. After that, nothing. In 2006, the house was sold again, demolished. The ground paved over for a parking lot behind a laundromat. The soil beneath the lot tested positive for chemical accelerants in 3 separate core samples. But no excavation was approved. The city wanted the lot. The case remained open, but quiet. Nothing in it pointed to a motive. Nothing ever screamed. Just that cycle. Summer lights, silent drain, no one leaving. Just gone. Some say Vance worked with shelters to find his tenants. Others think he waited at bus stations, offering cheap housing to people who had no reason to say no. But one folder, the last one, dated 2005, had something different inside. A photo, a blurry Polaroid of a man sitting at the basement table, mid-meal, eyes not quite looking at the lens. The lighting was harsh, yellow, off-center. On the table beside him sat a salt shaker, a folded napkin, and a glass of water. On the wall behind him, barely visible through the grain, was a red marker circle drawn directly on the wall, 2 feet wide, surrounding his chair. The next summer, no one moved in. The next killer didn't wait for summer. He didn't wait at all. He walked into hospitals, into waiting rooms, and every time he sat down, someone else stood up and was never seen again. It started at a small regional hospital in Ohio in the winter of 1993. A psychiatric patient named Eileen Stratton was scheduled for a voluntary intake after experiencing acute dissociation. She arrived at the hospital entrance, signed in, took her seat in the waiting area, and vanished. Staff remembered her name. Her file was logged. But when her name was called 10 minutes later, she was gone. Not in the restroom. Not in the hallway. Security checked cameras. She'd been seen sitting quietly by herself. Then, nothing. A shadow of movement blocked the lens for 6 frames. After that, empty chair. Her coat remained. Her purse untouched. Her ID wedged in the seat cushion. She was never found. It was dismissed as a runaway case. But over the next 5 years, 11 more patients, all mentally vulnerable, all scheduled for low-risk observation, disappeared in similar circumstances. Different hospitals, different towns, always small regional facilities, always in the Midwest. Each time the person signed in, waited no more than 30 minutes, then vanished without a trace. Most weren't noticed for hours. Staff assumed the patient had stepped out for a cigarette, or changed their mind, or been called without their name being checked. But in 1997, an ER clerk in Akron remembered something strange. She'd been filling out wristbands when a man sat down in the corner across from the vending machines. Mid-40s, clean haircut, neutral clothes, holding a clipboard. She assumed he was from administration. But when she looked again, he was gone. She remembered him because his left shoe had been untied. The next morning, a patient who had been scheduled for suicide risk evaluation was declared missing. The man on the security tape, same seat, no ID badge, no recorded entry through the front doors. The pattern was too soft to call a case. But in 1999, a nurse in Toledo saw a figure sitting in the psych ward waiting room well after hours. Visitor hours were closed. Staff assumed he was from a transport team, but no transport was scheduled. By morning, a patient had failed to check in. Her name was logged. Her arrival confirmed. Her face visible on the entry camera. Her car left parked outside with the door slightly open. But her file remained unclaimed. She'd never been admitted. When staff called the front desk, no one remembered seeing her leave. She had waited, and then she hadn't. A psychiatric intake coordinator from Columbus began tracking disappearances across county lines. She cross-referenced check-in logs, missing persons, and surveillance timestamps. What she found was unsettling. In each case, security footage either skipped frames or had a shadow event, 6 to 8 seconds of blurred movement or unexplained signal distortion. It was always in the waiting room. It was always just before the person vanished. In every tape, there was one thing in common: a clipboard left behind, on a chair, on a windowsill, on the floor. Always blank, always clean. Always with a single pen clipped to the top. The pens were cheap, office issue, but they never matched the brand used by the hospital. 7 of the pens were recovered and analyzed. All had the same tiny serial stamp near the ink barrel. That model had been discontinued in 1989. The FBI refused to open a formal file. Local jurisdictions treated each disappearance as a separate event. Some were blamed on mental breaks, others labeled voluntary missing adults. But one detective from Indiana followed the trail on his own. He reviewed tapes, drove to 5 of the hospitals, and spoke with surviving intake clerks. 4 remembered seeing a quiet man in neutral clothes. 1 remembered the untied shoe. When the detective filed his report, he included a photo of the waiting room chairs from each location. They were all different. But in each photo, one chair had scuff marks on the armrest, the kind left by a clipboard that had been set down and picked up many times, always in the same place. In 2001, a patient named Charles Weller checked into a psychiatric wing in Dayton. His brother dropped him off, walked him to the lobby, and watched him take a seat beside a man holding a folder. Weller waved. The brother left. 20 minutes later, the hospital called to say Charles had never been processed. He was never seen again. The tape showed him sitting. Then nothing, just a folder on the floor. That was the last confirmed disappearance. No suspect was identified, no charges were ever filed. But behind closed doors, some hospital administrators created a code term for the event. Room 0. A notation added to the corner of logs when a patient disappeared during intake, with no witness, no exit, and no footage. By 2003, all public hospitals in Ohio had quietly reinforced waiting room camera protocols. Entry logs became digital. Clipboards were changed to branded, color-coded models. But one intake nurse in Michigan claims that in 2004, she still saw him. A man standing in the lobby across from the vending machine, staring at the elevator. She looked away for 5 seconds. When she looked back, he was gone. She only remembers one detail. His shoe was untied. The next killer didn't walk into hospitals. He didn't wait. He didn't sit. He found his victims by sound, one frequency at a time. He hunted with recordings. And he always made the call at night, always just after 2 a.m., when the temperature dropped and static started to crawl across phone lines in quiet homes that still used landlines. The voice on the other end was never a stranger's. It was someone the victim knew. A brother, a son, a girlfriend. Their voices were clear, familiar, but always just off, too perfect, the timing wrong, the tone distant, and always the same message. Can you come get me? The first recorded incident happened in Sparks, Nevada in 1988. A woman named Linda Caro drove off the road while trying to reach a remote gas station off I-80. Her car was found the next morning, still running, doctor ajar, lights on. She had left a voicemail for her roommate saying her brother had called her from a number she didn't recognize. He was stranded, needed help. Her brother had been dead for 5 years. Police dismissed it as confusion, maybe an emotional breakdown. But the following spring, it happened again. A man in Carson City claimed his girlfriend had called from a motel in Reno, asking him to pick her up. When he arrived, the room was abandoned. 2 hours later, he was found wandering the parking lot, barefoot, incoherent. His girlfriend had been killed in a car accident 6 months earlier. The cases stayed local until 1992, when a recording technician working at a rural Nevada AM station picked up a low-band frequency call during a dead zone. It was a clear, repeated message. "Can you come get me?" The voice was male, mid-20s, calm. The technician recorded the message, thinking it was an interference glitch, but when he played it back, the voice was gone, replaced by layered static. Forensics later isolated 3 different pitch tracks in the audio, all of them sampled from known local public access broadcasts, spliced together with precision. The voice had been built. By 1994, law enforcement began quietly cataloging similar disappearances. The common link wasn't location, it was signal behavior. Victims reported hearing the voices of the dead, but the phones never rang twice. Caller ID showed blank entries. Traces of the calls were unrecoverable. One officer working the case said the victims were all chosen by their audio, people who had recorded something, anything, publicly. A voicemail, a shout-out on a radio station, a clip from a school play. And every call came from one radius, a 30-mile stretch near Broom Lake just north of the old Nevada test site. When the FBI got involved, they found something even stranger, a hidden concrete structure in the desert uncovered during a controlled burn with no listed owner and no access road. It was buried 4 feet under dry brush. Inside, a single reel-to-reel tape recorder, a generator, a microphone, and a wall covered in hand-drawn frequency charts, all mapped between 4.32 and 6.27 megahertz. On the floor was a phone, rotary, black, disconnected, but it had scratch marks near the earpiece as if someone had gripped it too tightly. The tape reels were blank, but when one was examined under UV light, faint impressions of spliced segments could still be seen. Tape that had been cut and re-glued over and over. One label, written in faded red marker, read, "Linda, clean version." They were building voices from recovered audio, from grief. The victims all received the same message, always the same phrase, always the same voice as someone they loved. Most were never found, but the ones who were had walked miles into the desert, into the hills, into nowhere. One left their shoes behind. Another was found holding a disconnected phone receiver with the cord still dragging behind them. No blood, no struggle, just confusion and heat stroke and silence. One woman was found in 1995, standing in her backyard at dawn, holding her phone in both hands. The call had ended hours earlier, but her hands wouldn't let go. She couldn't speak. She never spoke again. When tested, the phone had no call record, but her answering machine had recorded the voice. It was her son, clear, warm. "Mom, can you come get me?" He had died 2 years earlier in a house fire. Technicians ran the audio. It was him, but it wasn't. It had a hiss at the edges, and one missing consonant, the S sound, flattened out like analog bleed. A cut, a gap in fidelity. Real splicing. Whoever made it had built the voice from memory. In 1996, a woman named Jolene Myers received a call from her late father. She'd been estranged from him since 1982. He asked her to meet him at their old cabin in the hills. She left a note. She drove out alone. Her car was found on the side of the road, door open. A trail of footprints led into the dirt, then stopped. No sign of struggle, just a melted plastic tape reel in the passenger seat. The killer was never caught. But in 2001, during construction near the same desert radius, engineers digging for a new telecom tower found what looked like a buried freezer. Inside were 15 labeled tapes, each marked with a first name and a year. All between 1988 and 1996. The tapes were water damaged, but 3 could be partially recovered. Each was a voice saying the same line, not shouted, not panicked, just warm. "Can you come get me?" The final tape ended mid-sentence. The next killer never used voices. He didn't need to call anyone. He just moved into the woods, built a greenhouse that never grew anything, and waited for people to walk too close. The first missing person report came in during the fall of 2002 near Clatsop State Forest in northwest Oregon. A teenage boy named Everett Nolan had gone hiking with friends and separated briefly to photograph fog banks near an abandoned logging trail. He never returned. His camera was found 20 feet off the trail, face down, battery removed, no signs of a struggle, no footprints beyond his own. A week later, a park ranger found something stranger. An unnatural clearing tucked into the slope of a wooded ridge. A rectangle of cleared land surrounded by flat stones with a single structure built at the center. It was a greenhouse, roughly 20 by 20 feet, framed in treated pine, plastic sheeting for walls. There were no plants inside, no tools, no heater, just condensation, heavy, everywhere. The door was unlocked, the floor was bare soil, and in the dirt, footprints, not Everett's, but dozens of partial prints in overlapping loops, too smeared to match, as if someone had paced there for hours. Along the far wall, water had pooled where the ground sloped slightly inward. Beneath the pooling, a single boot print, deep, alone, and then nothing. The greenhouse was dismantled and removed. Officials assumed it was a squatter structure, but 2 years later, it was back. Same dimensions, same design. Built in a slightly different clearing less than a mile away. This time, the inside walls had duct-taped patches where the plastic had torn, meaning someone had maintained it. Again, no plants. Again, just condensation. Thick and silent, sliding in slow droplets down the inside. That same fall, a woman named Kendra Bell disappeared from a nearby trail while running with her dog. The dog was found. She wasn't. Her car keys were discovered 2 weeks later beneath a rock 50 yards from the greenhouse. The greenhouse itself had been cleaned. The soil looked raked. Someone had tried to remove the prints. Over the next 6 years, 4 more disappearances occurred within a 3-mile radius of that forest, all within 90 days of each greenhouse appearance. Each time the structure was found. Each time it was empty. No DNA, no trace evidence, but always the same air. Damp, sweet, like something had been wet for too long. One ranger called it the smell of breath. In 2008, thermal imaging drones picked up a heat signature in the forest matching a temporary shelter. A search team arrived the next morning. The greenhouse was gone. In its place, a rectangle of flattened grass. In the center, burned wood and melted plastic. Beneath the ash, fingernail clippings. Human, cleanly cut. DNA matched a 31-year-old hiker named Lewis Grant who had vanished 2 weeks earlier. His file was closed. Accidental death. No charges filed, but one field agent submitted a side report. Inside it, she noted the greenhouses had been built with exact measurements, every side 240 inches. Every plastic panel stapled in the same pattern, 3 across, 3 down. Like someone was rebuilding the same box, again and again. In 2010, a pair of biologists camping off-grid found another structure. This one had a lock. Inside was a folding chair, a radio, and a single piece of lined notebook paper taped to the wall. It was blank, except for the date. November 2nd. That same date, a woman from Portland was reported missing by her roommate. She had planned a solo camping trip in the same forest. Her body was never found. But her bootlaces were discovered strung between 2 trees, 50 feet from the greenhouse site. Braided, tensioned, and tied in a spiral knot used for drying animal hides. It wasn't a common knot. It was one taught in a now outdated military survival manual printed in 1979. The FBI opened a file in 2011. Aerial footage revealed 5 separate clearings within the forest over the previous decade that had all returned to natural state. Yet soil samples showed trace fertilizer, polyurethane residue, and small amounts of paraffin wax. Wax consistent with certain types of scent masking. One agent speculated the killer used the greenhouses to control smell and moisture to prevent dogs from tracking anything. Another agent noticed the glass. Some panels weren't plastic. They were real glass, thick, untreated, meaning the heat would rise inside fast. Any living thing left inside could pass out in under an hour during the day. In colder seasons, breath would collect on the surface and fog the entire interior. No one outside could see in, but whoever was inside could only see themselves. The last greenhouse was found in June 2011, closer to the tree line, less hidden than the others. This one had 4 chairs inside, arranged in a circle. In the center, a pile of wet clothing. No tags, no blood, just socks, shirts, a scarf. Beneath the pile, teeth, loose, polished, all molars. There were no roots, just clean caps. The door had been sealed with copper wire. One hinge was bent outward, as if it had been kicked, not by someone entering, but by someone trying to leave. It was the last confirmed structure. After that, the appearances stopped. But hikers still report the smell in certain parts of the woods. The smell of wet air, shallow breath, and slow fog against plastic. No one ever saw the man who built them. No trail cams ever caught movement. But a single pine tree near the first site had faint carving rings, barely visible under the bark. When it was removed and split for examination, one growth layer from 2003 contained graphite residue, pencil lead, as if someone had drawn inside the tree while it was still alive. The file was never closed, only reclassified. The next killer didn't use forests. He lived inside apartment buildings, one hallway at a time, not as a tenant, not as a squatter, not as anyone with a name. He never showed up on leases, never left behind mail, never appeared in billing systems. But over a 12-year period across Illinois and southern Wisconsin, fingerprints matching one man, a man who had never been identified, appeared in at least 16 units inside public housing complexes. Always in places no one should have been. Inside sealed utility closets, behind drywall access hatches, embedded in the dust on top of ventilation shafts that required climbing gear to reach. The prints were partial, smudged, but the same ridge pattern recurred across all sites, a curved loop with a broken line through the core. The FBI database returned no matches, but local forensic analysts began calling him the floor plan ghost, because wherever he appeared, the blueprint didn't make sense anymore. The first case was in 1994. A woman in Rockford reported that someone had entered her locked apartment while she slept. Nothing was stolen, but her kitchen chair had been moved 6 inches to the left and her hallway closet was open. The building manager changed the locks. 2 weeks later, her neighbor went missing. The door was locked from the inside. The chain latch engaged. When police forced entry, they found the TV still on, food left cooking, and no signs of struggle. The bathroom closet had been pushed inward, revealing a hollow space where the wall met a shared ventilation shaft. In the shaft, they found scuff marks and handprints in dust. One print had fresh oil residue, but no one fit the space. It was 20 inches wide. The wall had no maintenance panel. The only way in or out was through that closet. But the woman had locked it from the inside. The case was ruled undetermined. No charges filed. By 1997, 3 more buildings reported similar events. Residents felt watched. Items moved. One woman filed a complaint after hearing coughing behind her bathroom mirror. She lived alone. Maintenance checked the wall cavity, found nothing. But the mirror had prints on the inside of the glass. Someone had pressed their face to it. The oils revealed a nose, mouth, and chin. No match. The frame had been lifted from the bottom edge. A pattern repeated in 2 other complexes the following year, always in buildings constructed before 1980, always ones with older duct systems, wide shafts, low wall insulation, soft drywall. No cameras, no maintenance logs. Whoever he was, he chose buildings by layout. Floor plan mattered. The geometry needed to be right. He moved through shared walls, stayed above false ceilings, waited in crawl spaces between stairwells. But he wasn't homeless. He wasn't scavenging, he was living, quietly. And every time someone moved out or disappeared, the unit was rented again, cleaned, repainted, and the pattern started over. In 2001, a child in Kenosha told her teacher that a man lived behind the corner. She said he watched through the heater vent. The school filed a wellness check. Officers found nothing, but in the child's room the vent cover was upside down, a detail most wouldn't notice. Inside the duct, wrapped around a seam, was a rubber band holding together a tiny stack of Polaroids, all blank, all undeveloped. But beneath them was a note, a torn scrap of yellow legal paper that read, "Roomworks." No handwriting match was ever made. Between 2002 and 2006, 5 residents across 3 cities vanished inside buildings later linked to the same fingerprint pattern. One was an elderly man who never left home. Another, a college student. One was deaf. One had recently installed new locks. In each case, the scene was undisturbed, locked from the inside, no forced entry. But always, there was a strange detail. A vent moved slightly, a wall panel misaligned, a single thumbprint behind a fuse box. In one case, the imprint of a bare foot on a beam inside the attic, a place no tenant should have had access to. The insulation had been brushed away in a clean line, as if someone had laid there. A detective working the case noticed the strangest thing of all: the floor plans. In every building, the same corner unit was affected, top floor, northeast corner. That unit always had an internal cavity where 2 walls met. A space between walls that should have been solid. The blueprints showed nothing. But in each of those corner units, a hammer test revealed hollow tone. And in the walls, evidence of living. Water bottles, torn sheets. Once, a nail file. Another time, a pack of crackers unopened. In the worst case, they found a mattress, rolled, compressed into a false wall sealed from the inside. Whoever lived there had folded themselves into space. They had learned to vanish inside architecture. The prints were partial, but consistent. The left ring finger had a scar ridge, a line that interrupted the pattern in the same way each time. Forensics called it a control point, a mark left from a healed injury, probably from youth. But it was enough to confirm that the same man, the same presence, had moved through at least 16 buildings in 12 years. And the movement was purposeful. He followed evictions, vacancies, renovation schedules. Whenever a unit was emptied, he came back, and when it filled, he watched. In 2006, a city inspector reviewing fire safety compliance in a low-income complex found a sealed utility box that didn't match the blueprints. It was behind a tenant's refrigerator, recessed in the wall, bolted shut. When it was opened, inside was a hollow cavity, barely large enough for a man to sit. In the dust, footprints. The walls had scratch marks, not frantic, not clawing, just contact. Long lines where fingers had rested, waited, balanced. On the inside of the box door, written in pencil, were 3 words: "Not this room." That was the last physical trace ever recovered. The prints stopped appearing after that, but the buildings didn't change. And sometimes when units are renovated now, when walls are opened and drywall is cut back, they still find signs. A nail in a place no nail should be. A hook installed inside a duct. A mirror with backward pressure marks on the glass. One superintendent swore he found a coffee lid inside a vent with a date scribbled on it. 10 years old before the unit had been built. But when he tried to report it, the lid was gone. The next killer didn't use buildings. He didn't need walls. He just needed people to talk. And once they told their story, he rewrote the ending himself. It started in a Denver trauma recovery group for survivors of violent crimes. The group was small, private, and held off record in the basement of a Methodist church. No cameras, no recordings, just voices, chairs, and notebooks. No one read. In the fall of 1998, a woman named Gloria Preston shared her story for the first time. She had survived a home invasion 6 years earlier in Kansas, locked herself in a bathroom while the intruder ransacked her apartment. She'd never seen him. He never touched her. She got out alive. In the group session, she described the sound he made, a low rhythm like tapping on ceramic tile. After the session, she told the group she felt better. That night, she went home. 2 days later, she was found dead in her kitchen. Her body showed no signs of assault. Her door was locked from the inside, but the bathtub had been filled with cold water. Her shower curtain was ripped in half, and the bathroom floor had shallow grooves etched into the tile, a pattern of long, curved lines. The forensic team called them deliberate, almost like writing. The group dismissed it as tragic coincidence until it happened again. A man named Ellis Reese, who had survived a gas station robbery in 1992, spoke for the first time about the way the gunman had hummed a tune. Something repetitive, childlike. He'd never told anyone that detail before. 2 weeks later, Ellis was found in his garage, dead from apparent self-inflicted wounds. But his radio had been left on. The cassette inside was blank. But when run through audio filters, a faint sound emerged. Humming. Not from the radio, from behind it. The counselor who ran the group began noticing something else. The survivors who opened up the most were the ones who started withdrawing, not immediately, slowly. They stopped answering calls, missed meetings, avoided check-ins. And when police began looking into it, they found another layer. Each one had received a letter in the mail in the weeks before their deaths. The letters were printed on unmarked paper, delivered with no return address. The content was brief. A single sentence. Tell it again. In every case, no signature, no variation. By 2003, 7 members of various trauma circles in the region had died under suspiciously calm circumstances. No signs of forced entry, no outward injuries, no financial motives. The only link, all had publicly shared stories of survival, and all had received that same message. Survivors of domestic violence, carjackings, fires, assault. Even a woman who had been pulled from a lake after a car crash. She'd never told anyone her full story until 2004. When she finally spoke about it in a recorded podcast, she included a detail that had never made it into the police report, that she remembered seeing her own reflection in the rearview mirror just before the crash and thinking, this isn't the end. 2 months later, she was found dead in her car, pulled from the same lake. The engine was off, no trauma, just a folded piece of paper on the dashboard that read, "The End." The FBI opened an unofficial file in 2005 after 3 different support groups across Colorado and Wyoming reported members dying within months of disclosing personal stories. The cases weren't connected by geography. They were connected by silence that followed the telling. A former homicide detective who volunteered in one group claimed that the deaths weren't just being orchestrated. They were being structured, patterned, as if someone was finishing open narratives, closing loops in stories that had once ended in survival. Whoever was doing it wasn't reacting to the crimes themselves, they were reacting to how the stories were told. One audio recording recovered from a voicemail contained a whisper, not threatening, not pleading, just 5 words spoken with slow breath. Let me finish your version. The prints never matched. The letters never stopped. In 2006, a man named Calvin Shore, a former EMT who had survived a building collapse, received a letter that simply said, "Did you forget the sound?" He hadn't spoken about the incident in 8 years. But 3 months earlier, he had written about it anonymously for a publication. He died on his front steps, key still in the lock, eyes open, no clear cause. By 2007, the term narrative collapse was coined in private FBI memos. It described cases in which a person who had once survived trauma died under unexplained circumstances shortly after disclosing previously unshared sensory details. Things like a smell, a rhythm, a name that was never logged. It wasn't just survival that made them targets. It was the act of putting it into words. Someone was collecting those words. Someone who didn't like incomplete endings. No suspect was ever named. But one counselor who worked with 3 of the victims later noticed that a man had attended each of the 3 sessions in separate cities, using different names, never speaking. He would sit near the back, carry a notepad he never wrote in, and always leave just before closing remarks. She described him as unmemorable, ordinary, average height, average clothes. Like someone made him to disappear inside a chair. When shown composites, she couldn't pick a face. He never reached out to her. But one night, after she returned from a conference, she found her own counseling folder sitting on her kitchen counter. Not missing, not copied, but folded open to the page where she'd written about a nightmare from childhood. That page had been underlined, with a note beside it, "Don't skip this part." She moved, changed her name. She never shared another detail publicly. The next killer didn't care what you said. He didn't need to hear your story. He just needed to know when you were alone and where you kept your freezer. It wasn't the disappearance that raised alarms. It was the temperature. The first known case happened in Hibbing, Minnesota, in the winter of 1991. A school teacher named Roberta Lane failed to show up for work during a snowstorm. Her front door was locked from the inside. The driveway was freshly shoveled. Her boots were by the door. The fireplace was still smoldering. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry. The television was on. Her tea had gone cold beside an open book. The only strange detail was that her deep freezer in the laundry room was empty, not unplugged, not broken, just wiped clean. The plastic bin scrubbed. No frost buildup, no food, no odor. The cord was plugged in. The temperature gauge read normal, but when investigators checked the internal log, the unit had experienced a spike, exactly 5 degrees above freezing for 7 minutes during the previous night, then returned to normal. Nothing else in the house was touched. Her body was never found. Over the next 5 years, 3 more people in northern Minnesota went missing under similar circumstances. Same model of freezer, same brand, all in homes located at least 20 miles from the nearest gas station. The houses were always locked from the inside. Pets untouched, phones still charging, and in each case the freezer had been emptied. No sign of what had been inside. One technician noticed a pattern. The temperature logs weren't just spiking randomly. They all showed a rise at exactly 3:17 a.m., and they all lasted 7 minutes. Not 6, not 8, 7. In 1998, a man named Joel Hendricks installed a new digital freezer in his cabin near Grand Rapids. The unit had a built-in motion detector designed to detect opening and closing activity. 2 weeks after installation, he left town for a work trip. When he returned, the freezer was empty, no sign of forced entry. But the logs showed 3 anomalies. First, the lid had been opened at 3:17 a.m. for 12 seconds. Second, the temperature rose to 37 degrees for exactly 7 minutes. And third, the internal motion sensor registered an object entering the unit at 3:19 a.m., then nothing leaving. But no body was found, no DNA, no fingerprints. Just a faint, wide smear of condensation along the inner edge of the lid, almost like a handprint, but too large, as if someone had leaned against it, pressing outward from the inside. The cabin had no signs of intrusion, the alarm system wasn't triggered, and the snow around the property was untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints. But in the corner of the garage, Joel's security light, wired to a pressure plate, had been unscrewed. No damage, no broken glass, just turned until the contact pin lost its line. The FBI became involved quietly. An analyst reviewing home appliance data from northern counties found an unnerving trend. Between 1991 and 2004, 14 homes had reported unexplained temperature anomalies in their freezers, all involving the same 7-minute spike between 3:10 and 3:30 a.m. Of those 14 homes, 9 later filed missing person reports within 6 months. The others were vacation properties with no permanent residents. But one detail held across all locations: the brand of the freezer. A regional manufacturer that had gone out of business in 2005. The model: a top-opening 24 cubic foot unit with no automatic lock but a reinforced hinge pin and internal insulation thick enough to mask sound. A former repairman who serviced one of the units described the lid as heavy enough to stay down without latching, but once closed, you couldn't open it from inside without leverage. He didn't know who designed it that way. Theories emerged. Some believed the killer used the units as makeshift isolation chambers. Others speculated the freezers were staging points, not for killing but for holding briefly before moving the body. But that didn't explain the timing. Why always at 3:17? Why 7 minutes? And why was nothing ever left behind? One anomaly gave investigators their first clue. In 2003, a survivalist named Henry Lisk set up motion-triggered cameras around his property after experiencing strange interference with his generator. He lived alone, had no freezer, but he installed one after a neighbor's disappearance and wanted to track everything. On March 18th at 3:16 a.m., the motion camera in his kitchen flickered once. One frame was captured, a blurred figure standing near the open freezer, too tall for the room, back slightly hunched, arms long. The next frame, nothing. The freezer was closed. The timestamp read 3:24. But when Henry reviewed the freezer log, it showed no anomalies, no temperature shift. The object never entered, only observed. He left town the next day, moved south, left the freezer behind. The last recorded case happened in early 2004. A family of 3 was found missing from their home near Bemidji. The dinner table was set. Dishes placed for a meal no one started. Their freezer was empty. But this one had been different. This one had been unplugged. When plugged back in, the internal clock reset to 12 a.m., but a backup capacitor in the circuit board had preserved one data point: the final reading before power loss. The temperature at 3:17 a.m. was 37 degrees, and the motion sensor registered downward pressure on the lid for 5 full minutes before it failed. No evidence was found, no signs of struggle, no exits breached. The police marked it as involuntary disappearance. The manufacturer's building was demolished the following year. The freezers weren't the weapon, they were the portal, the pause, the place someone or something entered without needing the rest of the house. The units were built with silence in mind: heavy lids, thick rubber, no alarms, no locks, just wait. And in every home it was the same: a moment of warmth in the cold, then nothing. A clean floor, an empty room, a soft hum of a unit that held nothing, but knew. The next killer never used tools. He didn't need freezers or walls or recordings. He only needed to be mirrored, and once you looked at him, once you really saw what looked back, you were already gone. You've met him before, not because you remember him, but because he showed you something you couldn't forget, and you've been trying not to think about it ever since. He didn't follow. He didn't speak. He didn't chase. He only ever showed up once, always between noon and 3 p.m., always when the light outside made everything else feel safe. A knock on the door, a soft apology, an offer. Do you have a second? No uniform, no clipboard. Just a man in clean clothes and polite posture. No one remembered his face, only that they couldn't look away from it while he was there. Between 2015 and 2019, 7 people in Genesee County, Michigan died by apparent suicide within 72 hours of reporting a strange visitor. Their deaths were quiet, non-violent. Most left no note. But in each scene, police found the same object, a freestanding mirror, recently moved, placed across from where the body had been found. The mirror was always rectangular, frameless, unmarked, positioned at seated height. In one case, it had been taped to the ceiling above a mattress. In another, leaned against the closet door, angled downward. The victims were unrelated. Different neighborhoods, different ages, no shared background, but all had one thing in common. Their last known visitor had never been identified. In 2017, a woman named Callie Merson was found in her apartment after co-workers filed a welfare check. She had missed 2 days of work. Her car was still in the lot. The door was locked. Inside, the TV was off. Her phone was beside her, untouched. Her body was found on the couch. Overdose. Intentional. No signs of struggle. The only detail noted by the responding officer was the mirror, a large one, recently moved, positioned upright in the center of the room, facing her directly. Behind the mirror, hidden inside the frame, was a folded sheet of white paper. On it, a single sentence. "Do not look away. This is your shape now." It wasn't handwritten. It had been printed, trimmed, and pressed into the backing with adhesive. The font was standard. The paper clean. When the scene was processed, detectives noticed something else. The apartment was too clean. No dishes in the sink. Trash removed. Even the toothbrush bristles had been cut down, as if someone had trimmed them after use. Her therapist later revealed that Callie had mentioned a visitor, someone who had come by offering a posture assessment. He had a soft voice. Said he worked for a wellness startup. No one ever found such a company. No one else ever remembered seeing him enter the building. The next victim, a man named Jordan Ellis, was found in his bathtub with the water running cold. The mirror was mounted across from the tub, too high to reflect his body, but angled directly at his face. No note was found. But beneath the sink was a small pile of objects wrapped in tissue. Nail clippers, a hairbrush, and a comb with all the bristles cut out. It was as if he had removed every tool that could distort reflection. An FBI profiler reviewed the cases and noticed something disturbing. In each incident, the mirror had been purchased within the same 2-week period. Cash, no receipt trail, always from second-hand stores within the region. But fingerprints on the glass always matched only the victim. The outside of the mirrors were smudged, moved, carried, but the inside surface was untouched, as if the person who placed it never needed to adjust what the mirror showed. In 2018, a woman survived. Her name was Tabitha Crane. She had been found disoriented and dehydrated in her apartment, with the windows blacked out and her mirrors shattered. When brought in for evaluation, she wouldn't speak, but she drew, over and over again, sketches of faces, not hers, not anyone else's, always the same proportions, same features, eyes too wide, mouth slightly parted, and behind the face, always a shadow, narrow with hands pressed against invisible glass. When her doctors asked what she saw, she only wrote one word: me. She disappeared 6 months later. No witness ever saw the man leave. But in 2019, a delivery driver caught something strange on his dash cam while parked near an address linked to one of the later deaths. For exactly 18 seconds, the passenger side camera caught the reflection of a man standing in the third-floor window of the building, staring directly at the truck. The man didn't move. He didn't blink. But in the mirror's surface, his hands appeared to be shaking. The footage was enhanced. The face was never fully visible, but the timestamp was 2:44 p.m., 30 minutes before the occupant of that unit called in a noise complaint, then never picked up her phone again. A theory emerged that the man didn't kill. He mirrored, that he studied his targets, built a psychological portrait, then arrived at the moment when they were most fragmented and offered them a reflection they could not survive. Not a mirror, but a message, a still image, a version of themselves they had buried. And once they saw it, not metaphorically, but with their eyes, something broke. In 2020, the mirror trail stopped, but one more was found. A tile left behind in the Flint Public Library, wrapped in brown paper. No note, but under UV light, a faint fingerprint. Too long, too thin, not human in proportion. Forensics dismissed it as damage, but the employee who found it claimed she'd felt heat radiating from the tile, even though it was cold to the touch. She kept it in a drawer. 6 months later, she left her job. Her apartment was never searched. Her name was never publicly tied to the case. But someone submitted a photo to the local newspaper months later, anonymously. The image showed her apartment window from the outside, reflected in the glass. A man standing behind her, pale, blurred, his hand raised, just one finger pointing upward. The next killer didn't show anyone their reflection. He didn't care who they were. He only cared how they moved and how fast he could stop that movement from ever happening again. The first body was found in the Arroyo, west of Rio Rancho, New Mexico in April 2007. A jogger, early 30s, no injuries, no sign of trauma. Her muscles were locked, mid-stride, one foot still hovering an inch off the ground. Her eyes were open. No sign of struggle, no drugs, no illness. Just stopped. The coroner listed the cause of death as acute cardiac arrest with no underlying condition. Her face showed no fear, but her arms had stiffened in an unnatural way, elbows rotated slightly beyond their normal range, as if she had begun to fall backward and then stopped partway through. The next victim came 6 months later. A boy on a skateboard found in the middle of a school parking lot with no board beneath him. His knees were bent, arms out, but the positioning didn't match a fall. He had been in motion, and then he wasn't. His spine showed no damage, but his shoes were fused to the soles of his feet with heat blistering, like friction had been applied violently in a single instant. Again, no blood. Again, eyes open. Again, no struggle. Just stopped. Police chalked it up to coincidence, seizures, medical failure. But by 2010, there had been 9 such deaths across Bernalillo and Sandoval counties. All victims under 40, all found outdoors, and all in active positions. One man had been mid-dive into a swimming pool. His body had struck the surface like a stone, fully tensed, arms forward, chin tucked, water bruising consistent with hitting from 10 feet up. But there was no jump point, no diving board, no ledge. The pool was empty when paramedics arrived. No one saw it happen. Just a splash, then a float. The ME ruled it a catastrophic muscular seizure, but muscle tests showed nothing, just rigor without decay. Like the body had tried to move again, then gave up. In 2011, a state trooper began cross-referencing cases. One detail stood out. Each scene had faint impressions nearby, not footprints, but streaks, long drag lines in the sand or gravel, 6 to 8 feet in length, always running parallel to the victim's frozen position. Too straight to be animal, too shallow to suggest dragging. In one case, they were paired, 2 streaks exactly 4 feet apart, but no tire marks, no tracks, just trails. Like something had passed through without weight. The FBI declined to open a file. But internally, the state crime unit assigned a label to the events, FLX, Frozen Locomotion Unknown. It wasn't official, but the files began to grow. The most disturbing case came in 2014. A woman named Eliza Redding was found in her backyard, hand raised to knock on the sliding glass door. Her hand never touched. Her arm was fully extended, fingers curled slightly inward. Her other hand was holding a grocery bag, mid-swing. The surveillance camera on her porch captured it. One frame, she's walking. Next frame, she's still. Nothing in between. The bag remained upright. The milk inside was still cold. When the footage was played in slow motion, one shadow could be seen passing through the far corner of the frame. Not human, just a shift in the light, a flick, a ripple, and then she was gone. Not taken, not removed, just paused. Rigor had set instantly. Her pupils were dilated. Her brain showed no signs of decay for over 36 hours, like time had bent. Briefly, an independent physicist reviewing the case proposed a theory that the killer wasn't breaking the body. He was breaking momentum, a forced interruption of kinetic energy. Not from impact, but from something else. Something that neutralized motion without touching tissue. The coroner disagreed, but couldn't explain the lack of cellular rupture. Muscles stayed tensed, tendons froze under load. Bones never fractured, even in awkward positions. One cyclist was found straddling his frame, both wheels still spinning. He had been dead for 4 hours. No suspect was ever seen. No witness described anything more than a shiver or a glitch in the air. But one man, a geologist running tests on seismic activity during the 2015 incident, reported a microshock, a brief, unregistered vibration that lasted less than a second. His equipment picked it up at the exact timestamp a hiker was found 200 yards away, mid-step, arms raised as if trying to block light from her eyes. There was no sun, but her pupils were pinpricks. She died standing. One victim was found with a GPS tracker on their watch. The coordinates traced their run in perfect loops until one final blip showed them 23 feet east of the trail, stopped, unmoving for 7 hours before the body was discovered. The data point read 0.0 miles per hour, heart rate null. But the device showed no shutdown. The watch kept running. The pose cutter left no messages, no notes, no motive, but every victim had one thing in common. They were all moving when it happened. Walking, running, reaching, not lounging, not sitting, not hiding, always upright, always in forward motion, as if that was what triggered it. By the end of 2015, a local reporter attempted to publish an article linking the cases. It was pulled within 24 hours, but a digital copy remained on the server. The headline, mid-motion. The subhead, what if your next step is your last? The next killer didn't wait for you to move. He just listened, and if you sounded like someone he once knew, he found you and took the voice back. Everyone he killed had one thing in common. They all sounded like someone who was already gone. He wasn't copying their voices, he was collecting them. The first cases never looked like murder, not even like disappearances. They looked like accidents, strokes, fatigue. But something was always missing. Not blood, not evidence, Something internal, something pulled from the chest without trauma. A woman in Austin, 1999, found dead at her kitchen table with her head tilted slightly, eyes open, one hand still holding a pencil. Her notepad showed the start of a phone number. Her coffee had gone cold. The neighbor said she'd been humming earlier, loudly, happily, just 20 minutes before. The autopsy found no cause of death. Her lungs were clear, heart normal, no rupture. But her vocal cords showed an unexplained fissure, as if they had tensed, spasmed, then gone slack mid-breath. The coroner called it a freeze-in phonation. He'd never seen it before. She had been a singer. 1 week earlier, she'd sung a demo for a friend, covering a 1970s lullaby. The original artist had died 5 years earlier in a house fire. Over the next 5 years, 13 similar deaths occurred across Texas, most in small towns, most inside homes or libraries or sound booths. In each case, the victim had recently recorded or imitated someone else's voice. Never professionally, just casually. Karaoke, home videos, voicemails, reading aloud from old letters. Always the same pattern, a voice brought back. And then the speaker died. No weapon, no warning, just collapse. But the bodies were strange. Rigor set late, eardrums always ruptured, vocal cords always smooth but abnormally stretched. In some cases, the larynx had signs of pressure, not external, not choking, but internal resonance damage, as if something inside them had vibrated too hard, too fast, for too long. One police report in Lubbock described it this way. It was like she'd heard something that shattered her from the inside out. The victim had been reading a poem aloud, a piece her mother had written years ago. She never finished the final line. Her audio recorder was still running when her body was found. The last 6 seconds were corrupted. But beneath the static, a low sound can be heard. Not a voice, a mimic, as if the last word she spoke echoed back too perfectly, as if it hadn't just been repeated, it had been taken. In 2006, an audio engineer in Houston collected tape from 3 separate cases. When played simultaneously, the 3 tapes, all of them damaged, produced a harmonic note that lasted exactly 8.7 seconds. It wasn't part of the original speech. It didn't match the room tones. He ran the frequency. It matched the note E2, the average male speaking pitch, but no one on the tapes had been male. He spliced the tone, reversed it. A whisper emerged. One word, mine. By 2010, the killer had no known face, no fingerprints, no location. But he had a pattern. And that pattern got clearer. Each victim had one thing in common. They all had been mistaken for someone else. Not in looks, in sound. People remembered them sounding just like someone